Hey, it's Scott Blessing and welcome back. I'm coming at you having just left Lonely Planet's #1 U.S. destinations to visit, Asheville, North Carolina. Imagine Asheville #1. I'm happy you chose to download a copy of my free book. And I hope you dare to do the uncommon and experiment with these same practices used by successful CEOs and executives from small business to large companies. Now, today's video is a bonus coaching on how to leverage your peers to grow your value and identity. You know, every client I coach is concerned about how they're seen and how they land on people, how people perceive them. And we all have areas in which we can grow and develop as an executive and leader. Principle number 1 is that the research tells us we can't grow without the help of others. We learn and grow best in community with others. Principle number 2, we live in a degree of blindness. In fact, we only really access 5% of our brain, our conscious mind, versus our unconscious mind, or 95% of our brain that's available to us. So the thing is, we typically make very little effort to accessing this part of the brain. So we all have blind spots, so let's acknowledge that. And principle number 3, paying attention to your blindness is essential to shaping the perception that others have of you. As author Marshall Goldsmith stated, we as leaders need to recognize leadership as a contact sport. The most important participants in this relationship are the leader and his or her colleague. So our leadership is undermined at every turn by our blind spots. And this self-deception is one of the most central issues of leadership today, and addressing it can be quite liberating for us, given that we all live in some form of blindness. So when we think an issue belongs to someone else, we continue to push harder and blame others, shifting our attention off ourselves onto someone or something else. And oftentimes, we can't see that we're at the heart of the issue, or that we're somehow contributing to it. We just do that thing we do, the automatic response we've learned through unconscious practicing, and that blinds us to the true cause of many of our challenges, and it then limits the solutions we come up with. So our perspective is skewed by our blindness, and as a result, our identity and value is undermined. So having an understanding of these 3 principles, our relationships are where we deal with our blindness. We can't grow without the help of others, and we need to be a warrior about growing our identity and our presence. And that is why I say leadership is a contact sport. We need to begin a practice where we strategically build our identity, elevate our value, and lower our risk. Now, we can do this by getting valuable and recurrent 360 feedback from our subordinates, our direct reports, our peers on our level, and colleagues above us. It may be challenging for many of us to ask for assessments on an aspect of our leadership or development. However, the more we see people as our equals, the more this resistance will tend to diminish, giving us the opportunity to leverage this very relevant conversation of our identity and value. Consistent follow-up to solicit qualitative assessments and ideas for improvement is a no-brainer, and the research on leadership development concludes that personal contact supports us in developing our impact and effectiveness as leaders. A key to changing our behavior and increasing our value and impact is to seek out feedback, modify our behavior on that feedback, and sustain those changes through recurrent practice. So, how can we leverage our peers with their feedback to help us to up our game? Here are the key steps to make this happen successfully. And it really is all in the execution. Step 1 is that you want to identify 1 or 2 areas of improvement that you want in your leadership or your identity, or how you want to be seen, or simply what you want to become more of. In other words, think about 1 or 2 things that you want to improve and get feedback from your peers that can really up your game. This aspect of your development may have been brought to your attention from your boss, your wife, in your development review meeting, or that you got some feedback from a peer. For example, it might have been that you get defensive in meetings, or maybe you got some feedback that you need to be more strategic in the key meetings around your management peers. You may have a couple of things to target, but you want to pick one to work with first. So pause the video now and reflect on step one. So select the one thing you want to work on. Okay, welcome back. So step two is that you want to identify 5 people in your circle of influence that you have regular contact with that can observe you regarding this one behavior you chose to improve on over a 3-week period and then on a recurrent basis thereafter. Now, these people should be a mixture of your peers on the same level as you, maybe a direct report, a boss, or a colleague in a higher position than you. And don't stack the deck because with people that you're comfortable with or who really like you. Use this as an opportunity to even select people who you don't know very well, who you may want to need to develop a better relationship with. It could be even a person who you really don't have a good relationship with. And this might be a way with which you can improve it. Be strategic about who you select. Now, you want to be able to select an individual who does observe you on a regular basis, because if they can't observe you, their feedback isn't really relevant. In fact, they're probably not going to agree to partner with you in this practice, okay? So pause the video again now and write down the names of 5 targeted colleagues you want to assess you. Okay, welcome back. Now, step 3 is the process of cutting a deal with your 5 targeted colleagues. And before you cut the deal, though, you got to be clear about what the deal is. And then you got to have a good relevant story with your request for them to help you with this. So the simple conditions are these. You're going to invite them to give you some feedback in a 10-minute conversation, one time every 3 weeks over the course of 6 months. Simple and clear, right? So it's one time every 3 weeks, and together you create a recurring calendar appointment for a day and time, and then manage the exceptions or changes, because inevitably there could be schedule changes. It's only a 10-minute conversation. So check this out. That's 5 people, 10 minutes a person, once every 3 weeks. Essentially, each month that's 50 minutes of feedback times 6 months equals 5 hours of feedback on a key area that you want to develop. This ongoing feedback is going to really help you grow. And another added benefit is that you can also possibly alter or shape the peers' perceptions of you regarding this behavior or otherwise. And politically speaking, that's a good thing, all right? So your next action is to get a moment to briefly talk one-to-one with each of your raters over the next week. So the action item is to cut 5 deals over the next week, all right? Good. Then the next step, which is step 4, is then having the conversation to cut the deal with your colleagues. So you want to make sure to have a relevant story. A very simple relevant story is that, hey John, I'm working on an aspect of my development that's part of my personal development plan that we have to do here in the company. You know, we got to do those plans. And then John probably shakes his head and says, oh yeah, dude, I got to do that too. I haven't done anything on mine yet. And so you chuckle about it and you say, hey, I'd really like your help. Now, that's a key point. I'd really like your help. I'm actually being very specific with those words because most people, when you ask them for or request their help, the person's going to want to help you, right? So this particular request happens to be around your development. So I'd say, hey, John, hey, I'm working on my development plan, and there's one aspect to my development that I'm addressing, and I'd like your help with it. Notice how I'm direct and to the point. And then probably John will turn to you and say, yeah, sure, Scott, what's up? Well, what I've chosen to work on is I tend to get defensive in meetings. And the person probably agrees with you or acknowledge that, and then they'll say, hey, so what I'd like is to have a 10-minute conversation with you, one time every 3 weeks, and get your feedback on what you have observed from me in meetings over the prior 3 weeks. So a brief 10-minute conversation to get your feedback specifically on what you've observed. That's basically it. And in that 10 minutes, just focus on the behavior. and any examples that you may have or anything that you've noticed that changed since the last time we spoke about this. So your colleague will probably turn to you and say, yeah, sure, no problem, I can do that. And I'd say, yeah, great. I suggest we set up a reoccurring calendar appointment for every 3 weeks, and then we'll manage the exceptions. We can get our executive assistants to set it up. And John will probably turn to you and he'll say, hey, yeah, no problem, good, let's get it set up. So I wouldn't be surprised if the person turns to you and says, hey, I'd like to do the same thing with you. They may want you to reciprocate, and that would be awesome. So that's just an example of the conversation to cut the deal, step 4. Make sure you have a good, relevant story to lead into the conversation. Don't forget this piece. I've never personally or had a client who got rejected from someone when they follow these guidelines. Make sure that the person has FaceTime with you to observe you, because there's no point in getting someone who you'd really like to get feedback from, who strategically or politically would be a great person to talk to if they can't observe you, all right? So, also I think that because you're working on something to develop and grow, don't be shy about asking people above you. Pick somebody who could be an ally of yours, or it could be a person who you want to get to know better. They may be very willing to observe you. You're in meetings with that person, but you don't have a relationship. They're in another department, but you want to get to know, or you want to get better aligned with them. All right? So the last step, step 5, is coach and nurture. Coach and nurture. And what that means is that most people are vague and they're not direct when making assessments. So you need to be in a 10-minute laser-focused conversation that gets direct assessments focused on that one behavior. So don't be surprised if people are vague, unfocused, and talking generalities. You got to rein them in a bit, okay? So be prepared to coach them when they don't necessarily realize you're being coached by you. So when you start the conversation in a 10-minute feedback session, tee it up by asking them or remind them, hey, I want to thank you for today's conversation, and I appreciate taking the time to share your feedback with me. Just a reminder, I'd like your feedback focused on my behavior, and any examples of what you've noticed would be wonderful. Just be prepared that when people aren't direct and succinct, then suggest to them, hey, do you have an example? Or, can you share with me an example? Remember, this is not an open feedback session. So in summary, all of my clients that take on this practice get amazing results. The benefits are you get relevant feedback, and you can use the conversations strategically to develop key relationships or improve relationships that need nurturing or that need improvement. This practice is proven to increase your executive identity and value. Send me an email or make a post on Facebook. Let me know what results you're getting. I'd love to hear from you about this. Also recognize that the last thing that you want to be doing is having this turn into a high maintenance thing with people. The key to the whole thing is how you tee it up. All my executive clients that have integrated this practice are amazed at the feedback that they get. The conversations are really off the charts. And many of them actually had requests to reciprocate from their colleagues who were assessing them. An awesome practice, right? It does really rock the house, and I look forward to hearing your feedback as you take this into your life and make it relevant.